I've read every issue of X-Men ever, which means I caught every comic reference in every scene of X-Men 97 Season 2, Episodes 1 through 5. There have been some deep cuts this season. If any piqued your interest, I can tell you which comics are actually worth your time to read. Stick with me and I'll lead you to Celestial Tier X-Men action.
We're back, baby.
Hi, I'm Greg, and this is Castro on Culture, where I talk about whatever I want. I wanted to talk about all of the comic book references in X-Men 97 Season 2 so far, but it'd be kind of boring for me to just list things. So, since I have read literally all of these comics, I thought I'd tell you my thoughts on each comic as we go. If you've enjoyed yourself by the end of the video, please consider subscribing. And obviously, spoilers are ahead for these episodes and the comics they're based on. Episode 1's underlying source material is The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. This came out in 1994 and was written by Scott Lobdell, who wrote a lot of the classic 90s X-Men. Gene Ha does the art. It tells the story of Scott and Jean going to the future and helping to raise young Cable. Unlike the show, they're never joined by the other X-Men. The comic goes hard into the Uncanny world that you see only briefly in this episode. It also covers much more time, with Scott and Jean raising Cable over the course of 12 years. When they first find him, he's still a baby with all of this freaky techno-virus gunk on him. Scott and Jean always go by Slim and Red when raising him, and never reveal that they are his parents, or in Jean's case, that she's technically kind of sort of his mom. But you can definitely see how the 97 designs for Nathan and Mother Ascani come right from this comic. Mother Ascani is actually a significant character, but I don't want to spoil who she is for you, because I'm almost sure the show will get to that at some point. She's voiced by Gates McFadden of Star Trek The Next Generation fame, one of 3 next-gen voices so far this season. Unfortunately, I don't really recommend The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. The strange Ascani characters are no replacement for the other X-Men, and Gene Ha's art is indecipherable at times to me. Cyclops in particular looks rough. You'll notice Scott and Jean look pretty different in the cartoon, however. As far as I can tell, their looks are unique to the show, but they still have a clear comics inspiration. The underlayers are their second X-Factor costumes. Written by Louise Simonson, this was a 1986 comic that reunited the original X-Men team after Jean came back to life. The first time. It wasn't well liked by fans for that reason alone, but many also thought the costumes were ugly. However, a simple color switch in issue number 24 made for a big improvement, and that's what you see in the cartoon. I actually do recommend X-Factor, especially their half of the Fall of the Mutants crossover. That's the first big battle against Apocalypse, where Angel gets transformed into Archangel. It's one of the greatest X-Men stories of all time. Adding the jackets, scarves, and shoulder pads seems unique to the cartoon, but it looks great. The other X-Men are wearing their late 1980s matching outfits. No one likes these. They took a lot of personality from the characters, but again, they look cooler here with the post-apocalyptic accessories. I do wonder how the team ended up with these costumes after falling through time in their 70s outfits for the most part at the end of Season 1. Wolverine is combining that look with his feral post-Fatal Attractions look, which is the comic where he lost the metal on his skeleton as he did at the end of Season 1. In the comics, he slowly began to lose his mind and become more animalistic, but that seems to have been dropped here, and I don't mind. This played out for years before it was resolved, and it never really led to anything interesting. I can't place these robots. Let me know in the comments if they're from anything you're aware of. And I don't think there are any references in this charnel pit or the later escaped crowd of prisoners. But again, let me know if you caught something. The fortress, however, is from Cable number 19 and appeared in the original series. All that being said, there's nothing from all of these elements that I think is worth your time to read. This Servant of Apocalypse is a classic comic book character, Ozymandias. He's actually Apocalypse's oldest servant, having been with him since ancient Egypt. He first appeared in Uncanny X-Men number 332 from 1996, and got his backstory in the Rise of Apocalypse miniseries that same year. He's a wannabe pharaoh that Apocalypse used his celestial powers on, turning him into stone, making him an immortal slave for eternity. It's strange because he doesn't actually appear in the later Rise of Apocalypse episodes, so we're getting him, but not his backstory, at least so far. I'll make my final recommendation on the Rise of Apocalypse series when we get to those episodes here shortly. The idea that Apocalypse has to regenerate in a high-tech sarcophagus is from Cable Comics in the late 1990s, but the larger regeneration plotline culminated with X-Men and the 12, a big crossover where Apocalypse tries to possess a version of Nathan. That's a really disappointing series. It was meant to be the final showdown with Apocalypse, who Destiny prophesied would be defeated by 12 specific mutants. Ultimately, that prophecy ends up being a ruse by Apocalypse, and the X-Men defeat him anyway when Cyclops sacrifices himself. It's a really nonsensical, underwhelming climax for an entire decade of stories. It's the second worst X-Men comic of all time. I'll make another video another day about the worst. But then we get the appearance of these four, and this is really surprising and exciting. These are the final Horsemen from Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force from 2010, a much more modern comic than any of these others. Their names are Decimus Furious, Sanjar David, Ichisumi, and Jeb Lee. War, death, pestilence, and famine, respectively. They all have pretty fun backstories. Decimus was a starving Roman peasant whose powers kicked in and led him to eat people to survive. He ended up being captured and put in the Colosseum. Sanjar was a Persian bastard son of nobility, who originally wanted to do good, giving stolen treasures to the poor, only to realize he was passing on death to the people he was trying to help. Ichisumi was a geisha who became jealous of the others and used her power to send beetles to devour her competition. She could feel their pain through her beetles and went insane as a result. Finally, Jeb Lee was a Confederate spy who returned home and was mistaken for a traitor. The Confederates burned his family alive, triggering his powers, which allow him to spread cancer through playing his drum. So, all pretty dark and interesting characters. Uncanny X-Force is one of the all-time great X-Men stories. It's a must-read. And speaking of, let's talk about Episode 2. This is a doozy. There is so much to cover. It's the X-Force episode, but it's also an X-Factor episode, and it also introduces multiple other classic teams to the cartoon. That being said, the plot isn't really based on any particular comic as far as I can tell. Emma Frost is featured in her most prominent role in the series thus far. She's one of the greatest X-Men of all time and has never really been adapted well, so it's nice to see her finally getting some attention. Check her out in Grant Morrison's New X-Men, Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men, and Jerry Dugan's Marauders. Otherwise, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you what a SHIELD helicarrier is, so let's just get into talking about X-Force. X-Force was roughly the fourth spin-off team of X-Men after New Mutants, X-Factor, and Excalibur. It was actually a successor to New Mutants, who were the first teen spin-off team consisting of Cannonball, Sunspot, Moonstar, Wolfsbane, Karma, Magma, Warlock, and kinda sorta Legion. Oddly enough, these characters have barely been in the original animated series or X-Men 97. It's really a shame because Cannonball and Moonstar in particular are iconic characters. Cannonball had a cameo and then was featured in one episode of the original series. Same with Warlock. Karma and Wolfsbane have had small cameos, but Moonstar, Magma, and Legion have never appeared at all. New Mutants is awesome. It introduces a lot of long-running X-Men concepts and has very consistent character development. I definitely recommend it. That just leaves Sunspot, who, of course, is a main X-Men 97 cast member, though here he is directly recruited into the X-Men through his relationship with Jubilee. It's the two of them that Cable comes to recruit, which echoes how he recruited New Mutants into the X-Force in the comic. That was the original incarnation of the team, but it was completely different. That team had Boom Boom, who makes lots of cameos in the show but has never been featured, Cannonball, who again was just featured once, Feral, who has only had cameos, and Warpath and Shatterstar, who have never appeared at all. Shatterstar has literally never appeared in animation as far as I've been able to research. He was in Deadpool 2, though.
Well, I guess we found something you're not better at.
To be fair, Sunspot did join the team by issue number 19, so the cartoon has exactly 2 members from the original team. Ultimately, however, I don't recommend the original X-Force comic. It's incredibly of its time, hideous art with lots of bulging muscles and pouches, and plots that don't really go anywhere. However, the other half of the X-Men 97 X-Force are 2 iconic X-Force members. Archangel has actually been in a couple versions of the team, but both he and Psylocke are best known for their appearances in Uncanny X-Force, the Rick Remender comic I mentioned that has the final Horsemen in it. This is a great book for every member of the team, which also included Wolverine, Deadpool, and Phantom X. It's a book about each of them working to overcome their trauma and not let it color their lives going forward, though Wolverine tragically ends up even more traumatized. Again, definitely check it out. Of course, Wolverine is off doing his own thing in the cartoon, Deadpool has only ever had cameos, and Phantom X has only ever been mentioned, so it's a real hodgepodge team in the cartoon. Jubilee has literally never been in any incarnation of X-Force in the comic. Overall, Jubilee as a character is so much more prominent in the cartoon than she ever is in the comic. Now, let's talk about X-Factor. X-Factor is a weird spin-off because it doesn't have any one purpose like New Mutants, Excalibur, or X-Force. Those are the Teen Team, the Magic Team, and the Black Ops Team. I mentioned X-Factor was originally a reunion of the original X-Men. For part of that series, they posed as private investigators who hunted down mutants. That kind of speaks to how X-Factor is always some version of an agency, whether it's private investigating or government mutant policing. The version we're seeing here is the government team from the 1991 revamp by Peter David. For once, this is a team that matches the comic exactly. We've got Strong Guy, Havoc, Polaris, Wolfsbane, and Multiple Man. Havoc and Polaris are super important to the history of the comic book. They were 2 of the first mutants to be added on top of the original team. And Havoc is Cyclops' brother, while Polaris is Magneto's daughter, although neither of those relationships have ever been established in the show. Definitely check out the old school Neil Adams X-Men run, issues 56 to 65. This was before the X-Men were even Uncanny. Those are some of the first great X-Men issues, and they feature both characters. But we're talking about X-Factor, and unfortunately, I can't recommend the 90s X-Factor run. It's cornier than usual and really doesn't have any memorable character arcs or villains. It gets undone by a lot of crossovers, and Peter David leaves after a short time. However, he would return in the early 2000s for a revival of the series, and this time he chose to focus the team on Multiple Man and return them to their private investigator roots. It falls off in its second half, but the first half has some incredible stories. I will say, both this and the 90s series have issues where the team go to therapy, and both are extremely well written. With the 2 major teams out of the way, let's talk about the villains real quick. X-Force is hunting down War, one of the original Horsemen of Apocalypse in both the cartoon and the comic. In fact, the special opening credits show his version of Famine and Pestilence as well. It also somewhat randomly includes Rappler, Whip, and Blade, who were unique characters from an episode of the original series. They were servants of Apocalypse, but they're dressed as hounds from the comics, which are mutants that have been forced to hunt down other mutants in the Days of Future Past timeline. Like I mentioned, the original X-Factor, Fall of the Mutants comic, has the first fight against Apocalypse and his Horsemen and is a must-read. And of course, the original Days of Future Past comic is an all-time classic, but it doesn't really have anything to do with this episode besides that cameo in the credits. Finally, at the end of this episode, Jubilee finds a bunch of young mutants locked up in the helicarrier, and it's insane. There are so many shown so briefly that I'm sure I'll miss at least one, so let me know if I did in the comments. I've split them up into teams to talk about them more easily. About half of them are what I'll just loosely call New X-Men, which are mutant students from the Grant Morrison, Joss Whedon, and Jason Aaron runs. We get first-time appearances from Quentin Quire, Eye-Boy, the Stepford Cuckoos, Beak, Wing, Radian, and Tattoo. Meanwhile, Dust, Life Girl, Angel Salvador, and Glob Herman had cameos last season. Absolutely read Grant Morrison's New X-Men, Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men, and Jason Aaron's Wolverine and the X-Men. That trilogy alone will give you a good feel for that decade of X-Men. Quentin Quire, in particular, is a favorite. He starts as an obnoxious villain before reluctantly joining X-Force in the Krakoa era. There have also been several instances of foreshadowing that he'll one day inherit the Phoenix Force. Next, we get a group that is actually officially known as the New X-Men, if that's not too confusing. They're basically the second wave of new modern students. And actually, most of them are missing. We just get Rockslide, Anole, and Pixie, who had a cameo last season. Their series isn't bad, but it's kind of forgettable. If the art appeals to you, definitely check it out. The final team here is shown in their entirety and will be very exciting for 90s teens. This is Generation X, the classic teen spinoff from 1994. We see Monet, Chamber, Skin, Sync, Mondo, and Gaia. None of them have ever appeared on the cartoon before. Their comic series started during the Phalanx Covenant event, which, if you watched the original series, you know is when a techno-organic alien race tries to assimilate the Earth. They're basically the X-Men does the Borg, and it's a lot of fun. The team is led by Emma Frost and Banshee rather than Professor X, so it feels pretty fresh. Believe it or not, there are still some random mutants left in this group. The most random is Grimlock, who I had to look up. She appeared one time in a 2018 issue of Iceman, of all things. I have no idea why she is included. Then we get Artie, who was a Morlock that appeared in the original series. He was also an Exterminator, a very silly comic team from the 80s. Then we get Maggie, who is the little mutant girl hiding in Alex Ross's classic series Marvels. She gets used as the emotional core of one of those issues and is the emotional core here. There's just something about that face. And then finally, we get a very deep cut in the group from the beginning. This was the other pair I had to look up. The black girl and boy here are Mark and Jill from the uber classic God Loves, Man Kills graphic novel by X-Men architect Chris Claremont. They didn't even have powers in the comic. They died immediately. Here they get some fun powers and live, so this universe worked out better for them. It's sweet. From that lineup, you should definitely read both Marvels and God Loves, Man Kills. Marvels also has an incredible podcast adaptation you should check out. And God Loves, Man Kills was one of the inspirations for X2. And that's everything I could catch in episode 2. Episodes 3 and 4 can be done together since they're both adapting the Rise of Apocalypse storyline. The big difference here is that the comic doesn't have any X-Men in it, kind of how Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix just had Jean and Scott. It's the story of Apocalypse overthrowing Ramatut, who is really Kang the Conqueror, and Ozymandias, the real pharaoh. Ramatut is indeed Kang the Conqueror in the cartoon. He escapes at the end, putting on his classic costume. He also mentions that he sometimes goes by Nathaniel, which is his original name, or Victor, which is a reference to Victor Timely, his 19th century incarnation. He's voiced by John DeLance, who played Q on Star Trek The Next Generation. That's 2 of 3. Another character the comic and cartoon have in common is Apocalypse's mentor, Ball, who is voiced by Michael Dorn, who played Worf on Star Trek, and that makes 3. Ball is killed by Ramatut in both versions. And both versions also have General Logos, though he looks completely different in the cartoon. I wonder if this version of Logos will become Ozymandias in the cartoon, since otherwise he isn't here. The Celestial ship is in both versions, though I looked back through the comic, and the Celestial doesn't actually appear. The cartoon also says the word eternal about 10 times, just so the 5 fans of that movie can get a kick out of it. Ramatut's defeat works a little better here because you at least get to see him fleeing. In the comic, it was very confusing because it was inspired by an older Fantastic Four comic where they fought and defeated Kang. So as a sort of wink-wink, that happens off-panel while Apocalypse is otherwise occupied. It's very unsatisfying. Apocalypse's transformation is much less dramatic in the comic, too. He just gets a little more swole and gets more powers. He doesn't get the suit. In the comic, the suit tends to be portrayed more as something he needs when he's nearing the end of a regeneration cycle, and those are always kind of poorly defined. There are even comics like Apocalypse and the 12 and the Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix that show he has become a shriveled old man, and the suit has completely replaced his body. In X-Men 97, it's the Celestial transformation that gives him the suit. We also see the origin of SHIP, which is the Celestial Temple itself. It's from the original X-Factor comic I keep talking about, and goes on to be a big part of Cable's solo comic. And of course, we saw it a lot in the original series. We also get reference to the Externals, which are the ancient band of immortal mutants formed by Apocalypse. I can't remember if that exact name had been said before in the original series, but it did feature Kadra, the thief mutant, who cameos here. The Externals are kind of an underdeveloped concept in the comics, mainly from X-Force, where there was a plotline suggesting Cannonball, of all mutants, might become one of them. My favorite is Selene, a vampiric faux goddess who fights the New Mutants and then the X-Men. She's never been on the show. Finally, we get Magneto's dramatic death. This was so surprising to me because in the comic, he died during Fatal Attractions, which is the great comic that was adapted for part of the climax of Season 1. They kept him alive just so he could have 2 episodes with Apocalypse and then die. I think they're definitely setting up another 90s comic, but I won't spoil it. All in all, you really don't need to read any of these comics. Rise of Apocalypse has very ugly art, and it's just very repetitive as you watch Apocalypse clash with the Pharaoh, visit the Celestial Temple, and have an underbaked romance. We're now halfway through the season with episode 5, and it's pretty interesting. It's a sequel to an episode from the original series called X, Lies, and Videotape. It's about how Silver Fox, Maverick, Sabretooth, and Wolverine discover an old Weapon X facility and realize some of their memories are fake. This is from Wolverine Volume 2, which is the classic 80s run of the character. In general, I don't recommend solo Wolverine comics. They tend to be very try-hard, edgy, with some really ugly art. I've read volumes and volumes, and the only one I enjoyed was the first part of Larry Hama's run, where Wolverine goes on fun adventures with Ernest Hemingway, among other things. This new episode is the first time we get Sabretooth in X-Men 97, though he was in the original series plenty. The same goes for Lady Deathstrike. She's very different from the comic. She's been combined with Mariko, Wolverine's ex, and she's not a part of the Ravagers as she was in the comic. Comic Lady Deathstrike would never help Wolverine get his adamantium back. Her father invented the process for grafting it to the human body, and she sees its use on Wolverine as sacrilege. This is another one I don't have a good recommendation for. That period of X-Men, known as the Australia era, is beloved by a certain age group, but I did not gel with it at all. The X-Men are spread far and wide, and most of them lose their memories, and it just doesn't retain any of what made the comic so good in the first place. Maverick makes his second significant appearance in the cartoon continuity here, and promptly dies. He did die of the legacy virus in the comics, but immediately came back to life for his own Maverick solo series. I had to remind myself who Kane is. He was a very obscure character from the original X-Force and Cable series, and he is best known for having been seemingly permanently dead since 2003, something that almost never happens in comics. I think that was the joke here. Kane is best at dying, so he dies immediately in the episode. Once again, I don't have any good recommendations for you here. These are not the X-Men's best characters by any means. Dr. Cornelius is also from the comics, mainly the classic Barry Windsor Smith Weapon X storyline. This was the first comic to really get into Wolverine's Weapon X background. It's where that iconic metal helmet with the red visor comes from. He died pretty quickly after that storyline, killed by Maverick, and came back years later in the Krakoa era. Some people love the Weapon X storyline, but I think it's slow and the art is ugly. But if you really love Wolverine, check it out. Dr. Cornelius is killed by the Brood, who appear in a very different context than the comic. The Brood are probably the most classic X-Men villains never to be covered by the original series. They kinda sorta were, but they were changed so much due to censorship that they were barely recognizable. This episode is clearly a response to that. It's very violent, with imagery that references movies like Aliens and The Thing. This is very different from the original Brood Saga in the comics. That one takes place mostly in space, with all of the X-Men present, and most of them infected. It's definitely a much more epic tale. I don't normally love X-Men in space, but that story is an exception. It came at the peak of Chris Claremont's run, where the team dynamics had gelled perfectly, and there was one good arc after another. It's X-Men versus Xenomorphs, which is just a great combo. Definitely check it out. When we first see infected Wolverine, he's posed in such a way as to evoke the famous cover of Uncanny X-Men number 234. He also evokes the cover of Wolverine number 1 once he's cured. The mutant being experimented on in the recording is Maggot, who also died to Weapon X in the comics, though he at least got to be an X-Men for a bit first in the comics, so bummer for him in this timeline. He's a fun character whose power is that he can spawn 2 big maggot creatures from his body. That being said, he mostly appeared in late 90s stories, which is an infamously bad period for the comics. I don't really recommend anything featuring him. Graydon Creed is referenced, the son of Mystique and Sabretooth. He appeared a lot in the original series. He's another late 90s character, though I do like a storyline where Iceman goes undercover in his political campaign. I have that in the Onslaught Aftermath trade paperback if you want to look it up for yourself. This is really a Morph episode, and we see him change into Puck and Guardian from Alpha Flight. Those are the Canadian mutants who had at least one episode in the original series. He also turns into the Thing from the Fantastic Four, as well as Deadpool and Silver Samurai. Again, Deadpool is always just a cameo like this on the show. Silver Samurai did have a featured episode in the original series. Morph is mostly a creation of the show. He is in the universe-hopping X-Men team Exiles, if you want to check that out, although it falls off really hard halfway through. But the first Judd Winnick part is great. And last but not least, Omega Red makes a return to the show, though it's strange because we last saw him fighting Prime Sentinels in Russia. How did he end up imprisoned in this abandoned Weapon X facility? Maybe time will tell. Omega Red is in a ton of Wolverine comics, but I think his best showing remains his original appearance in the classic Chris Claremont Jim Lee X-Men #4. We did it! That's all the references I could think of in the X-Men 97 Season 2 episodes released thus far. Like I keep saying, I surely missed some, so let me know what you caught in the comments. And if you appreciate the reading list I just gave you, please hit subscribe so you don't miss out on further recommendations in the future. I'll see you next time.